Welcome to Native Bidaské, Native News Online's weekly spotlight on the people making news and leading change in Indian country.
Welcome to another episode of Native Bidaské. I'm Levi Rickert, founder, publisher, editor of Native News Online. I'm your host today. And all month long, we at Native News Online have been commemorating the 100th anniversary of the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924, also known as the Snyder Act. Today, we actually have a special group of people, and they are our writers from Indian Country Media, which owns Native News Online and Tribal Business News. And we have our writers plus our producer. And so I'm going to introduce you to our group of Native young people. They're much younger than me. And so I'm really interested to hear their perspectives on what the Indian Citizenship Act means to them. So I'm going to introduce you to Kristen Lilya. Hi, Kristen. And you are from Bois, Forte, and you are the Native Bidaské producer. So welcome, Kristen. And then we have Neely Bardwell, who is from the Little Traverse Bay bands of Odawa Indians located in Michigan. And she is our political editor at Native News Online. And we have distinguished gentlemen, along with these distinguished ladies, we have Chez Oxendine, and he's from the Lumbee Tribe. And welcome, Chez. And then we have Kaili Berg. Kaili, tell us what tribe you're from.
I'm Alutiiq.
All right. And most of you had a hand in writing about the Indian Citizenship Act. Maybe, Neely, you haven't. You're the political writer, and Chez, you're the business writer. But certainly, Kristen, you have been participating because you've been producing, and we had the stream back that was shown on June 2nd, and then every Sunday since. You actually, from Bryan Newland to the Assistant Secretary of the Interior, Chief Hoskin was on, Mark Charles, and Kristen, what was some of your impressions? What did you know anything about the Indian Citizenship Act before we started talking about it in Native News Online, being the 100th anniversary?
No, Levi, if I'm being completely transparent, I didn't know that it was the 100th anniversary, and I learned a lot just producing our coverage and the live streams that we did. It was really enlightening to produce all of that coverage.
Yeah, and we've actually gotten some really nice emails from some of our readers, and so many people, especially non-natives, didn't have any clue that it was the 100th anniversary of the Indian Citizenship Act. And Neely, from your perspective, you just graduated from Michigan State University recently. What's your spin on the Indian Citizenship Act? Is it a time to celebrate, commemorate, reflect? What's your word for it?
So I was thinking about this, honestly, since you and I first spoke. I did start my position here only just last week. But I remember you calling me at the beginning of the month, or not at the beginning of the month, but a little bit after, and I remember you saying, I've been using the word celebrate, but then someone, told me, hey, it's not really something to celebrate. In fact, a lot of different tribes view it differently. And I would say that us here in Michigan, because you're from Michigan as well, Levi, have a little bit of a different perspective when it comes to being citizens of the U.S. And I kind of think of the conversation that we had with the NYCLU and the woman who was a citizen of the Onondaga Nation, and how she was talking about how they don't vote because when you vote, it has you check a thing that says I certify that I am a citizen of the U.S. and they don't want to recognize that they're citizens of the United States because they feel that it threatens their tribal sovereignty. So not only on that note of inclusivity of the different perspectives in Indian country, because we aren't a monolith and we all have different perspectives on this, I think for me, the best word would probably be, it is commemorate. It's recognizing, for me, it's about recognizing the past to build a better future. So that's kind of my take on the whole anniversary.
Yeah, Ches, what's your word? What word do you use? Celebrate, commemorate, observe, or reflect on?
I like commemorate, because it's not necessarily a celebration, because if it were a celebration, I think we'd be celebrating a lot more than we are. There's progress, and I think that's what is worth commemorating, is that the landscape in Indian country, both literally and figuratively, is wildly different today than it was when this act was first passed. It's still not a, in large ways, it's not a positive thing, for some of these situations that many tribes find themselves in. But there are steps forward as a result of this act that I think should be acknowledged and commemorated and reflected on. But I think, sort of seeing the difference between what it was like in 1924 and kind of the studying as I have a little bit some of the history of this stuff versus where we are now. I think the direction is forward, and I think we've made some progress in a lot of places. So I don't want to call it celebration, because we'll talk celebration when these relationships are more equal and fair, and when we are really speaking on sovereign grounds. But commemorating the progress, I think, is important, just to sort of, you don't want to lose hope. You don't want to lose track of the good things that have happened. So I like the word commemorate.
Kaili, what's the word you use?
Yeah, just like Chez, commemorate, this year, and it'll be 100 years this year. So 1924 is when it was passed, and it just kind of, represents that historical milestone that we've accomplished over the 100 years. But I also think, there's a lot more that could be done within the 100 years. Like we were talking about, kind of all the different things that have happened over 100 years. Really makes you kind of open your eyes nowadays to how can we, go about getting more sovereignty for tribal nations across the U.S. today. So, yeah, I like commemorate.
I think it's also too about recognizing the struggles and the work and the hardships that had to be done by our ancestors to get us to that point too. I think that's the biggest thing, is recognizing the work that people before us did for us to have the opportunities that we have now. And that's not to say that there is not more work to be done, because there is. There's a long way we still have to fight. But I think the biggest thing is recognizing the fight that our ancestors did put up for us to even be able to vote in, the U.S. elections today.
And I'll speak for myself. I've been doing a lot of reflecting, and you're right, Neely. Somebody did some pushback early on in some of our communication with tribes as we were approaching this, and telling them what we were going to do in terms of, and I used the word, out of ignorance, celebrate. And we did get the pushback. They said it's nothing to really celebrate. And so, but one of the things that really struck me, and I think I wrote it in my editorial it was published on June 2nd, was my grandparents were alive. And I know I'm older than you, but they were actually alive in 1924. And probably most of your great grandparents were alive in 1924. Otherwise, you wouldn't have Indian blood, right? So the Native American blood. So I kind of made me reflect on that. And part of their lives, early lives of my grandparents, they were not U.S. citizens per se. So that kind of brings it back to, you don't have to go too far back. I mean, 100 years is 100 years, a centennial. However, we're really closer to it than we think we are. Kaili, we're going to publish a article this weekend on the fact that Native Americans fought in the military, armed forces prior, and you wrote it, and prior to 1924, and quite frankly, that is one of the reasons why Congressman Snyder back in the early 20s pushed for the Act itself. It said that 12,500 Native Americans who were not citizens fought in the U.S. Armed Forces during World War I. So let's all of us talk a little bit about that the commitment Native Americans have had, and we've always been warriors, as they say. But Kaili, what's your impressions in terms of why do you think it is Native Americans fought in the armed services even before, and you can go back to the Revolutionary War, they've always participated. Why do you think that is?
Like you were saying, being a warrior has always been something that has been important and respected for, even before the New World people arrived. And so, a lot of tribes hold deep significance and respect for someone who is willing to fight for their people and their land. So I think that's a big factor in it.
Yeah, and Jess, do you have any opinions on that? Why is it Native Americans have been willing to fight in the U.S. Armed Forces even before they were citizens?
I think it's a combination of things. I think you have some folks early on, you talk about Revolutionary, Civil War, etc., who acknowledge that whether they're necessarily citizens of a given country or not, they're on particular land. And, you lose a fight, whether you're a citizen of the army or a citizen of the country whose army is fighting or not, the opposing army is going to move in. And that means you're going to lose what land you have. So I think it's a matter of practicality. I also think it's a matter, as I said, honor, and really, if you're fighting for a place and your people, it doesn't necessarily always matter beyond that. Just you need to protect your folks.
Go ahead.
And I think it's also a mixture of, you talk about citizenship. In some cases, it was a path to citizenship for some folks. You talk about military service for a lot of people these days, you hear, well, it's how I'm going to get into college, right? So I'm going to pay for college. So I think there's a lot of reasons that you find a lot of Native Americans doing it. And I think it's just a really diverse range of motivations for jumping in there and serving, if not your country, at least the people that you love. So.
Yeah, and I was recently in Rapid City for a conference, and I talked to the chairman of the Cheyenne River Tribe, and he had a really different spin, because quite frankly, people have asked me that throughout the year, separate from the Indian Citizenship Act. But they've asked, as bad as the federal government has been towards Native Americans, why is it we have, even now the Pentagon will report, we have the highest participation per capita than any racial ethnic group in the United States. And why is it? And his spin was the fact that we fight to defend the Constitution. The Constitution is where treaties are located. In there's some real specific language about the sovereign nations of tribal nations, the sovereignty of tribal nations, I should say, and tied to the treaties. And that's why sovereign nations can make treaties with one another, and that's why we have treaties. And Neely, you have an opinion on this?
If I'm being honest, I don't necessarily have an opinion, just because I think the reasons why people join the military are for a myriad of reasons. And I think in order to really get the real picture of why they're joining is to talk to a veteran. And I do know that veterans in our communities are extremely respected. And so I think in order to kind of get an opinion on that, I think we would have to speak with some veterans and also current armed forces as well who are part of our community. Because like Chez kind of hinted at, it's for many different reasons. I do think part of our dedication and devotion to protecting the land has a little bit of something to do with it, for sure. as well as the other reasons that all of you have discussed as well.
Yeah. And Kristen, I'm going to switch gears here. You have been, because of your position as the Native Bidaské producer, you've been privy to a lot of the interviews that we've done with officials talking about the Snyder Act. Was there one particular person sticks out in your mind that really impressed you? And then why don't you reflect on that?
Yeah, I think someone that really stuck out to me was Mark Charles. He talked about the classes that we took to get our citizenship, which would be the boarding schools, which I thought was super interesting, and I never really put that together before he said that. And then the conversation that him and Jaquel, I think her name was all about our citizenship wasn't offered and accepted, it was imposed on us, which I thought was super interesting to listen to.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I was. What's really nice about Indian country is we do all, and I think Neely, you mentioned earlier, we are not a monolith. So we all come at different positions among Native American issues from different perspectives, maybe region, tribe, whatever. And I was really impressed all month long with the variety of different responses to the Citizenship Act. In Secretary Holland, Interior Secretary Holland, actually wrote in an essay that she wasn't going to call out the fireworks. It was not a time to celebrate, but it was a time to reflect. So I thought that was pretty profound, pretty powerful. Tribal sovereignty seemed to come up a lot during the month. And it is that starting with treaties, our sovereignty allows us to be nation to nation with the federal government and have treaties. Tribal sovereignty still is something that's very, very much on the minds of tribal officials. And we've seen it in some Supreme Court cases recently, the one with the break-in versus Holland, and that was the one that actually dealt with the Indian Child Welfare Act. Fortunately, the Supreme Court upheld it by a vote of 7-2. Tribal sovereignty is that? And Neely, you interviewed the people up at the lady from Onondaga, and they take a very different position than you are. You mentioned that from where you are in Michigan. The dual citizenship, we're all dual citizens, whether we admit it or not. Are you okay with that term?
So I was kind of reflecting on that because I had never really thought too deeply about citizenship. As someone personally who was not an enrolled citizen in my own tribe because of certain life quantum requirements that I do not meet for X, Y, and Z reasons.
Like a 1/10% off, right?
Yeah, just, and as someone who has done extensive research on blood quantum politics, on citizenship, on sovereignty, throughout my studies at Michigan State, I think I kind of have a little bit of, I don't want to say unique because I'm sure other people think exactly the same things as me. I'm not unique. But I will say I think my take is a little bit different just because of the research that I have done and the different opinions that I've come across and the different experiences that I've seen. And I think when it comes to citizenship, obviously there's no right answer. There's no right way to feel about it. But I think I've never really thought too deeply about citizenship in the sense that I've always grown up knowing that I am an American who is also Native. I feel as though that's how I was kind of raised because I grew up in kind of a more, white community. So I was more American who is also Native, if that makes sense. But I think now the more I kind of grow up and the more I learn and the more I reconnect with who I am and my people and my community, for me, I don't think that we need white papers to tell us who we are. And that is citizens and Aboriginals to this land. We're Indigenous to this land. And I don't think we need white papers to tell us that. What I think citizenship does give us is the ability to vote. in elections that do affect us, because our land was taken from us, but before that, we were stewards of the land. We took care of the land. We made decisions along with input from different spirits, different communities, on how to protect things and how to, preserve life and preserve our way of life, right? And I think being a citizen gives us access to making those decisions so that one day we will be the original stewards of this land again. And I think that is one thing that citizenship does offer us. And I think that is something that is something to reflect on. Though, do I think, anyone's right or wrong for celebrating their citizenship? Absolutely not, right? I'm not going to tell you how to exist. And yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on it, because I think having that conversation with the woman from the Onondaga Nation kind of really made me think really hard about how we view citizenship, because I think having to say on when we vote, yes, I am a U.S. citizen, kind of ignores the fact that we are also citizens of sovereign nations, because we are sovereign. But yeah, in a nutshell, I think citizenship is really important when it comes to voting and making decisions that affect us.
And it is a mixed bag in Indian country in terms of citizenship. Chez, not to put salt in your wound, but technically your tribe is not a federally recognized tribe, even though at some levels it is. It's just not funded federally recognized tribe. But being a Lumbee, does that play into what your feelings are about dual citizenship, or not really?
It does, actually. I think a large part of it is, being Lumbee. There's always this sort of very interesting conversation. I should say always. There's sometimes some really interesting conversations about, like, who's native and who's not. And there was a real big discussion at the National Congress of American Indians last year, if I recall, regarding state recognized membership. And Lumbee's kind of fell in the middle of that because of the sort of mixed recognition that we have in places. I really liked what Neely said there about, it's not so much I need a white paper to tell me where I'm a citizen of, because my last name's Oxendine, and the moment someone hears that is anywhere in Indian country, you go, "Oh, you're a Lumbee?" Right?
That's a common name down there.
It is.
Along with Jacobs, right?
Jacobs, Locklear, Chavis, Hunt, and Oxendine.
Correct. Yes.
Of course, I end up with the one that everyone says sounds like a medication, but anyway. So I really like what Neely said, though, that you don't need a white paper necessarily to tell you who you are, but the fact that we can vote is important, because we talk about sovereignty. As much as I hate to say it, as much as there is this extremely unequal relationship, for there to be a nation-to-nation relationship, you have to have people recognize that. And in some cases, you have to have people in power recognize that. And so reporting, as I have on a lot of cases, we talk about digital sovereignty, we talk about agricultural sovereignty, food sovereignty. These different forms of sovereignty are all crucial to the overall tribal, assertion of the self and the self-governance. But for that to really carry weight in terms of practical, tangible results, you have to have a good nation-to-nation relationship. And that means that citizenship, insofar as it means voting and having a say in who is running the other nation and the nation-to-nation relationship, is crucial, I think. So I really agree with a lot of what Neely said, in that it's not so much I care about, I'm a citizen of the United States, so much as it is I'm a citizen of the United States who gets, however minor it is, a say in who's running the ship. So.
Thank you. Kaili. You
Yes,
are an Alaska native living
yeah,
in Wisconsin.
I am.
So that's kind of a mixed bag. What's your feeling on this whole discussion of dual citizenship?
Yeah, so I really liked what Chez was saying, on like protecting, food sovereignty and stuff like that. Um, for me personally, my dad was in a missionary and taken to Wisconsin. So it was one of those things where I never really got to experience my own culture and kind of be in there. So it was kind of like a um, one of those things where I'm kind of like a cultural identity thing. And so that goes into saying like I think the tension between the U.S. Citizenship and tribal sovereignty, is such a huge and complex issue, and it's really deeply rooted. So there's just so many things that go into it. Cultural preservation is kind of like my take on it. It kind of affect that. I mean, you see that today, with historical trauma associated with, the forced integration of U.S. citizenship and stuff like that. Language is a huge threat right now. There's some languages that are even almost going extinct right now. So I think that has a lot to do. For me personally, I really fight for tribal preservation and language. So yeah.
Well, I have one last question for all of you. This has been fun. We're going to do it again. I'll start with you, Kristen. Throughout this episode, the word voting has come up. And let's tie it to dual citizenship, the honor or the privilege, right? Whatever word you want to use to vote. Why is it, in your opinion, Kristen, why is it important for Native Americans to vote?
I think it's important for Native Americans to vote because if we don't vote, our voice is not heard. I vote for my family, my current and developing family. And we talk about 7 generations all of the time. And if we don't vote, nothing is going to change. And I just encourage everyone to vote so your voice is heard.
Neely, why is it important for Native Americans to vote?
I would say it is important because of exactly what Kristen said. It is about 7 generations ahead. The decisions we make now are going to affect our children and then their children for years to come, as long as this land exists, right? And as long as we exist, for that matter. But I'm never going to shame someone for making the decision to not vote because it is a very complex decision that many reasonings go into. A lot of people feel very disenfranchised by the system. They feel like their vote doesn't matter or they don't have the power to change anything, so why even try at all? And that is not their fault that they think that, especially Native people. Even today, our vote is still being suppressed. Me and Levi, talked to the NYCLU, and then even a situation in Michigan where there was a clear case of voter suppression. So even still to this day in the 21st century, our vote is still being suppressed. And I think that's a reminder of the fact that we didn't gain the right to vote until it wasn't that long ago. I mean, after the Snyder Act was passed, it was left up to the states to decide who could vote. And all natives, Maine was the last state to pass the law that natives could vote. And that was in the late 40s, I believe. So even up until then, we still didn't really have the ability to vote. And so I think because of the continued voter suppression that is happening, I think a lot of people feel like their vote doesn't matter. And so I'm not going to shame anyone for not voting, but I do think it is important, although our system is very not perfect by any means, to put it lightly. I still think it is important to make sure your voice is heard, especially on issues that are very, very important. Especially now when we have our tribal sovereignty and we're trying to do things that are going to benefit our community. We're trying to develop our economies. We're trying to create jobs and make sure that there's opportunities for our future generations to reconnect with their culture and we can save our language. And all of those things we're trying to do, could be at risk, depending on who's in office, right? Because they're the ones at the end of the day passing the laws that affect all of our lives. And so I do think it is important to make sure your voice is heard, no matter who you vote for. I think it is important to make sure that your opinion does count.
Jess, you have 30 seconds to give that. Why is it important for Natives to vote?
The short version is if you shove me in a room and tell me, okay, you're in this room now, you get a say in what happens, I'm going to make sure that I am heard. If someone has shown up and taken the land and established themselves as the ruling party, I'm going to be loud about what they should be doing with it. And I think people who can and who view things that way, the same way that I do, should get out and vote. Their voices should be heard. Not every, as Neely said, not everybody feels that way, and I certainly respect that decision. But for my part, I think if someone's going to be running the show, I'm going to, solicit it or not, offer my advice on the matter.
Yes, and I think that
You have 30 seconds.
Yeah, and I think that, right now we've, especially with Secretary Deb Haaland, we've had a lot of amazing things happen in Indian country. So I always encourage everyone to go vote. And like Neely was saying, if you don't want to vote, that's all right. But yeah, so hopefully this year we can be heard.
This has been fun, guys. We've been talking with our Native News Online, Tribal Business News writers and producers about the Indian Citizenship Act, and then we trailed off with the importance of the Native vote. So thank you, Kristen Lilya, Neely Bardwell, Chez Oxendine, and Kaili Berg. Keep doing great work for Native News Online and Tribal Business News. And to our viewers, thank you, Chi Miigwech, for tuning in to another episode of Native Bidaské. It's going to be the 4th of July weekend coming up next week, so be safe. Make sure you protect your children from those fireworks. And you're going to go celebrate in a very respectful way, but be very careful with those fireworks. So Chi Miigwech, we'll see you next week with another special guest for Native Bidaské.
If you appreciate what we do here at Native News Online, we invite you to donate to support our continued work covering Indian country. You can scan this code with your smartphone or go to the link located below this video to donate today. We greatly appreciate your support. Please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And be sure to scan this code or go to the link below to subscribe to our newsletter. Thank you for joining us today, and please be sure to join us again next week for another episode of Native Bidaské. Chi Miigwech.